Good day and welcome to Cats About Town, TVC 22 in Clarence, Rockland. Today we have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Mr. Don Boudria, who has been a staple of this part of the world for many years with a lot of experience, a lot of contributions to the community, and even after sort of 20, 25, a few times years, he's still not slowing down. And we're going to try and find out a little bit about what inspires him, what inspired him, and the messages that he has for those of us who are interested in the welfare of this wonderful community in this wonderful part of the world. Mr. Boudria, thank you very much for joining us for this interview.
Thank you for the invitation.
We have a uniquely bare hall this time in a uniquely new structure. Mm-hmm. This was quite a big event when this came to Clarence, Rockland.
Well, the structure is so new to me that I even went to the wrong place to do the interview. I went to the old structure, so there you go. That just proves how new it is. But the hockey school and the arena here, of course, the new arena was a tremendous benefit to the town. I even have a member of my family who attended the hockey school for a number of years. And today he plays hockey in the United States. So there you go.
So that's an endorsement for the school.
Yep.
There we go. Now you go back a little time, back to the 1960s, 70s when you started in politics.
I first ran for public office in the 1974 municipal election in Cumberland Township. Mm-hmm.
At the tender age of 20-something?
24.
24.
And was soundly defeated. Not a good start.
Not a good start.
Not a good start. Now, mind you, it was a good lesson, but it didn't feel like a good lesson on that particular day. But in any event, I announced quite innocently the night of my defeat at the City Hall of Cumberland Township, at the Town Hall, as it was called then, that I was running again in the next election, which is rather unusual. And I guess I campaigned consistently, and the second time I won. And I won 10 more times after that.
Yeah, what were you after? What was it that drove you to do this? It's a lot of work campaigning.
Yeah, I guess it was a childhood ambition. Mm-hmm. It's something I wanted to do. I talk about it in my autobiography that I released some years ago, Busboy from Kitchen to Cabinet, yes. That it's called.
Catchy title.
Yeah, thanks. But I refer to it in there, how it had been something that I wanted to do as a child, raised by my grandparents, because my father died in a car accident when I was 4 years old. And my uncle, who was living with us, and he was a bachelor living with my grandparents, and he always talked about how he would run for municipal council the next time, except he never would. And I didn't understand as a child, you know, an adult is this great big creature who can do all kinds of wonderful things because they're big. And and I couldn't understand why he could be a municipal councillor and then did not do it. To me, that was just unimaginable. And I guess it became part of the childhood obsession. And eventually, I guess I started working on Parliament Hill as a junior staffer, as a busboy, carrying the dirty dishes, telling my colleagues on the Hill that someday I was going to be one of them being the MPs and cabinet ministers. Can't imagine what they must have said of me after I walked away a few feet. They must have said, did you talk to this new guy? He's a little bit different.
What's he smoking?
he thinks he's going to be a member of Parliament someday. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But anyway.
You showed them.
Well,
were they serving you someday?
Not the same people,
no.
But many of my work colleagues, though, I saw them again after I'd been an MP, yes. But it's not me that showed them, it's the voters of Glengarry, Prescott, Russell who showed them.
Okay, good point. There's something very awesome about that institution of the Parliament.
Yeah.
I worked downtown, I worked for Treasury Board for many years, and I would often walk by the Parliament, and it really stirs something in you.
It's awesome. Mm-hmm. In every sense of the word, not just the sense that 15-year-olds use awesome to describe the new dessert that day or something.
Yeah.
There's something that truly is different. And every day that I was an MP, and I was an MP at the federal level for 22 and a half years, I was elected in totality for 30 years, but every time when you cross the threshold of that door, you know that you're in a place that is special. John Diefenbaker once said that there was no greater privilege for a Canadian than to serve in Parliament. It's not a right. No greater, it's not a right, it's a privilege. The privilege that is granted by the voters of your area.
Yes.
And it's true, and you feel it when you're there.
An enormous amount of work.
Oh yes,
Enormous.
the days are very long, particularly the years that I served as Chief Government Whip and later in Cabinet, as a Cabinet Minister. Well, the day lasts until basically the new one starts. There's, you know, you have a few hours sleep, and it's just like being picked up by a whirlwind. It was fascinating. Minister of International Cooperation and being responsible for aid in Africa and Haiti, you know. During
carried
the
a lot of
Rwandan genocide
responsibilities.
and that period where I was helping, offering aid and all of these things. It was just so fascinating, and why me? I always ask myself, why me? How come it wasn't one of them, everyone around them, who was the minister, and I was? And yeah,
somewhere somebody must have written, why you?
well, I don't know. But,
yeah, I would say so. There must have been a farewell speech to you and recognizing
there were
your commitment.
There were a number of them when I left, and in 2005, I guess, I had been through 11 elections, 10 successful ones, and my first defeat at the municipal level. And then I decided that maybe it was time that I retired and learned how to speak Spanish and practiced my guitar more. So a few of these things worked. One part didn't. I never did manage to learn how to stay quiet, and I didn't put much effort into it either, for that matter.
No, well, that's one of the reasons that we've asked you to be interviewed, because there are people in this world who are inspired and inspiring, and they just can't stop. There's always a new project, there's always a new challenge, and it's never too late, never too difficult, never not worth the effort. And obviously that's been one of the things that's driven you. How did you, as a committed, decent, community-oriented person, how did you deal with the frustration of all of these voters that you went to see, electors, not voters yet, so many of them didn't become voters, that you went to see door to door in your campaigning, and then you know that they don't show up, and then they know that...
Well, it is frustrating sometimes, but not as much as one might think. Remember that I was very lucky in the years that I was in public office. I'll just give you the example of the 1993 election. When I went back to Parliament Hill, I had received 80.2% of the votes. My closest opponent had 8.
That's huge.
So when you go back to the Hill, it doesn't matter that you had an occasional frustration. You're so grateful and so inspired by the support that you got from your voters that everything else you forget, and you just keep plowing ahead, and you walk in there with your head up high, because you know that you know that you speak for your voters, because they told you, and they didn't tell you slightly. They told you overwhelmingly that they wanted you to represent them.
That's a very good point, because in our system, if you get 51% of the vote, then you're in. But that's only a 1% margin, and that would be difficult to take.
Actually, it means less than that, because in an electoral district where there are 4 or 5 candidates, you could actually be the MP with 25% of the votes.
Right on.
And and it has happened. The lowest percentage in the present election, I don't know. But in my last year in Parliament, there was the Bloc Québécois member for Gatineau, who ironically was a Franco-Ontarian from Hawkesbury, on leave from teaching school in Orleans, who was a Bloc MP for Gatineau. Anyway, this guy had been elected with 29% of the votes. So 3.5 times as many people had voted against him as those who had voted for him. But of course, nobody else had as many as him, so,
No,
so
so
obviously he was elected. So you see, all you need is not 51%. You need one vote more than whoever came in second.
There you go.
Yeah.
And you got that. And you got that many times. Well, you got it many more than that many times.
Yeah, I was very lucky.
And that brought you into the corridors of power, and that brought you into the other huge challenge for politicians, which is dealing with other politicians.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that is a challenge because, of course, it is a team sport. If I can, Canadians like hockey analogies, so here I am, I'll make some too. You don't play hockey alone. Well, you don't play partisan politics alone. So
Right.
when you're elected to the House of Commons, an MP is elected, but a party is brought to power.
Right.
That's right. It's not individuals who are brought to power, it's political parties. And then the leader of the political party that enjoys the confidence of the majority of the House becomes a prime minister sworn in by the Governor General. So Governor General appoints that person as prime minister, and that's how the governing structure is held as opposed to the parliamentary one. So all this to say then that it's clearly a team effort. And when you're on a team, and anyone listening to this who plays hockey even as a young person or who did, will know that the people on your team are your colleagues. The one on the other team are your opponents, and that's not the same as calling them your enemy. Sir Winston Churchill had apparently once in the British House of Commons, he was sitting there with and it was late in the day, and a new young MP elected in a by-election came in and didn't know what to say to the great man. I mean, it's after the war, and this world leader, and he's your colleague, so he goes to sit down with Sir Winston, and he apparently told him, Prime Minister, those people across the way are the enemy. And apparently Sir Winston said, no, young man. The ones across are your opponent. Your enemy is probably sitting right behind you.
Yeah, you know it only too well.
So sometimes on the same team. But of course, it's not that way. It's not that bad. Sir Winston Churchill was rather colorful at describing these things. But I had the unique pleasure of working with extraordinary Canadians on my side of the house. First of all, I was a minister under Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, a truly amazing person. I had as colleagues Sheila Copps, people.
Nobody's baby.
Exactly, and the Right Honourable Herb Gray, who's a person who served in the longest service of any Canadian in history. He was something like 41 years as a member of Parliament, and people of that quality that were my colleagues.
Yes.
It's quite humbling to see that you're there with extraordinary people like that, and they all give their opinion. You say, well, what about you, Don? What do you think? And then you're giving opinions at the same level as they are, all these great people. It's quite a humbling experience.
Yes, but like any team sport, it makes you rise to the best of yourself.
It has to. Otherwise it won't work.
And, well, I prepared a little bit for this interview, and that thing about the binder boy, that struck me. So there you are, trying to give your best, be prepared, have all of the information ready, and somebody finds a way to make fun of you for that.
Oh yeah, that was.
You didn't take that the wrong way?
Well, that was fun, actually.
That was fun, okay.
Because that's Deborah Gray. Deborah Gray was this rather robust Reform MP, perhaps some of our spectators will remember, from Alberta, who was quite verbose and quite tough. And she was asking questions of the Prime Minister, and other members were, about grants given by a certain government program. It was Human Resources Development Canada that was given the grants in question. There were job grants or something of that nature. And they were arguing that the grants shouldn't exist. But at the same time, most of them had applied for them for their own districts. And every time one of them would rise and ask a question, I would open up my binder, just pull out the information sheet about their own district, and pass it on to the Prime Minister. And so Deborah Gray rises to ask a question. I just open up the book to hers and take the sheet out to hand the Prime Minister. And she says, I want to ask the Prime Minister about these employment grants. I think she called them the $1 billion boondoggle or some exaggerated word like that. But in any event, and she said, and I don't want Binder Boy behind him to give him the answer. So that's how that phrase started and kind of stuck. And we see each other today, and we tease each other about that. She's been retired for many years, but when she comes to Ottawa, we always get together and chuckle about it.
So there you were, the original fact checker.
Yeah.
So now, I like that you describe politics as a team sport. And these days, there seems to be so much cynicism about politics that it's really difficult to get people interested to really understand what it really means and how important it is to the democracy we have. Maybe what's going on south of the border now is waking a few people up. We don't know if it's a passing phase. I would find that very difficult because you don't forget a nightmare like that.
Well, it should be a reminder.
It should be a reminder.
My view. I don't want to speak too disparagingly about leaders in other countries, but I think what's happening in the United States is, well, it's sad because I don't believe that the same person could have been elected to any office in Canada, let alone the highest office in the land. You don't use language of that nature and speak that way about women and about minorities and have your own personal behavior the way it's been recorded as having been and well recorded, and get away with it all and still be elected and come out at the top of the heap. But I saw demonstrations in the United States right after the election, and I couldn't help but ask myself the following question. In the United States, only 50% of people are usually on the voters list, and only half of them go to vote. And I saw those demonstrators, and I couldn't help but wonder how many of those people demonstrating actually voted.
Yeah, that was
the week before.
That was a very good point that Mr. Trump made, that President Trump, that where were they last week? Where were those marchers? Why didn't they vote? Yeah.
If they had voted, I don't think the result would have been the same.
No.
I'm convinced it wouldn't have been.
We've been lucky in this country because no matter how much people may disagree with the government in power, we've never felt that we are at the huge risk at which people in the States feel right now, let alone the rest of the world.
I think you're right. Like I served in Parliament and knew personally, I believe, 8 Canadian prime ministers. The present one, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he sat on my knees when he was 3 years old. It's in my book. Any of the readers who have a copy of my autobiography will see it in the center part where all the photos are. Of course, I knew his father. I served personally in the House of Commons with Jean Chrétien. Obviously, he was my leader. He appointed me to cabinet. Prime Minister Paul Martin. I had as colleagues in the House of Commons Joe Clark, Kim Campbell, Brian Mulroney, and John Turner. I don't know how many that makes, but I think it makes 7 or 8 or some such. And I knew personally 2 more before that. So Prime Ministers Diefenbaker and Pearson, none of them were bad.
No.
They were all good. You could argue, I would argue that some of them were much better.
Yes.
My profound admiration for Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Jean Chrétien will never fade. But still, all the others, they were all good.
Right.
So I'm proud of that. I think it says something good about our country.
So cynicism is a cheap shot because really it ignores the effort. Even if you don't get it right all the time.
Yeah.
There's
no doubt that the cynicism is there, but I don't think it's always well placed. And whenever I speak to young people, I always tell them, look at my haircut. You'll be around longer than me. In other words, you're much younger. So you've got more at stake than I have. So proportionately, people your age should have the higher percentage of voters than people my age, a lesser one.
What a good point.
Right? Because they have more at stake than people of my age group do. So it's their future, and it's up to them to take it into their hands, make their choices. They'll disagree with the choice of others, and so on, but that's okay. They'll have participated in the choice.
And hopefully, before they make the choice, they will have engaged in seeking information, engaging in debates, and learning
Go
how
to the public meetings if you
argue.
want to. Help someone in a campaign, and later run yourself. That's what I did. They
That's
can
what
do
you
it
did.
too.
That's what you did. That's what our current MP, Francis Drouin, did, and
That's correct.
it's wonderful to see a young person like that with so much, well, not only brains, but goodness.
Francis Drouin, speaking of our MP, Francis Drouin, his grandfather was the Liberal Party president that brought me in provincial office.
Oh,
in
you're very
1981.
connected
Yeah.
then. Yes.
Jean-Claude Drouin, his grandfather, and his father, Yves Drouin, of course, was the mayor of Hawkesbury and a good friend. So I was very happy when he decided to run. I actually encouraged him a lot to do so.
Yeah.
And needless to say, I was jubilant when he won.
Oh, yes, I saw you. I was there that night at Gab's.
Yeah.
It was a very, well, he knew what he was getting into, which not everybody does.
Yeah,
and
indeed.
he's ready, but of course he's got the backing, he's got the help, he's got the mentors. And well, hopefully it'll be young people like that who will encourage other young people to get into this. And calling it a team sport probably helps.
Well, you know, one thing that the Prime Minister himself did a lot of that. The Prime Minister, of course, not only is he young, well, I was a lot younger than that when I was elected, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
He's young. He's 45 years old. He's 45 years old on Christmas Day. But he even looks younger, and he's surrounded himself with bright young people.
Yeah.
And in the last election, he attracted a large number of young voters. And then analyses done of the last election, pan-Canadian analyses, I'm not speaking of Glengarry, Prescott, Russell specifically, showed that the Conservative Party hardly lost any votes. Nationwide, they lost a few 100,000 votes. But what changed was all the young people who had not previously voted all came out to vote because of the new young leader of the Liberal Party, which made him eventually the Prime Minister and elected many of his MPs. So he was young and attracted young people around him, which in turn attracted the young voters who were not voting and made him come out to vote. So it's not that the Conservative Party was decimated because everybody quit voting for them. They did not. Most of them remained strong, maybe slightly different here around the national capital area because of some of the controversial positions taken by Mr. Harper vis-a-vis the civil servants. But overall, nationwide, the Conservative Party did not lose very many votes at all.
But there were more people who voted.
Yes, and most of them were young.
And
So the young people who were voting to the tune of maybe 10, 15, 20% in previous elections came out maybe 75, 80% or some such. And they made the big difference.
now I will take a stretch here and assume, because I've never met him, but everything about him suggests that he is definitely a well-meaning and well-educated person, our Prime Minister. He has a lot of advisors, and advisors may lead you down the wrong track and make mistakes, and you pay steeply for that. Assuming that politicians don't want to make mistakes, they really want to do what's best for the country, is there any better system than this playing back and forth of power games and just use raw information to make decisions?
Well, no, it's
Computers?
never that. No, it's never that simple. Everything requires judgment, not just data. And the judgment is what you rely on your advisors to say, well, look, we now know that there's this much unemployment, there's this much this. What is the best strategy to bring people back into the workforce? What is the best strategy to achieve this social goal? What is the best strategy to encourage more women to vote? There's not data that'll give you that. It's judgment that'll give you that.
It is.
It's, we need more presence around the Prime Minister, showing that there's young people, young women in power now. His decision to make 50% of his cabinet women, which means, of course, there's very few women on the back bench, and even in parliamentary committees, very few of them to go around, because most of them are already cabinet ministers and don't do the back bench work.
Yes.
But that's a decision that he wanted to make, to empower those young women, which I think reflects very well in our country. And I think I know what it'll do. It'll mean that a few years down the road, more young people, particularly women, will want to run because they see that there's a very strong, significant role for them for the future.
Oh, as long as the ones who are there don't get shot down, because that would be, not everybody has that staying power of saying, okay, I'm going to do it even if it hurts.
Well, yes, it's, but it's not an easy sport.
No.
To get back to the sports analogy, it is tough to take sometimes, and it's tough on families and all of these things, but still overall it won't be perfect, but I think we can make it more encouraging, particularly for young women to run, which I think should be an important objective for a society.
Yeah. I imagine it would be much more difficult to run a country if the people who you represent were more willing to make sacrifices and not have sacrifices rammed down their throats. We are a rather privileged country, and what I notice is that people don't want to give up anything.
We always have this syndrome, and we have it locally here on the issue involving Highway 17.
Yes, we're going to get to that.
We'll talk about later.
After the break, yes.
But it goes to show you that some people call it the banana syndrome. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything, or sometimes not in my backyard. So we're all individually and collectively risk averse. We want to have more, but if it means stepping back and receiving less, even in the short term, we tend not to be too patient with that. That's human nature, I guess.
I guess it is human nature, and for that I guess one of the solutions to that is to make people travel around the world a little bit more and see just how well you can live with a little bit less.
That is actually quite surprising as well.
Yeah.
You know, I've been in Haiti weeks after the earthquake and saw that people were opening corner stands on the street selling cans of pop and bottled water, and commerce was coming back, and the resilience of the people had hardly anything to begin with, and the little they had was taken away from them, but they still had their human resilience. It was quite fascinating.
It is absolutely astounding. It never ceases to amaze me. Now, we are going to take a break now and then come back and talk about that highway.
That would be good.
That highway, which is going to be has been a test of our local democracy and people power. And I'm glad that you're involved, and the firm that you work with is involved.
Yes.
And please stay tuned and come right back for some more interesting, fascinating insight from Mr. Don Boudria. Welcome back to our wonderful interview with Don Boudria. We've covered a lot about his illustrious career, fascinating career, maybe not illustrious, that depends on the eye of the beholder.
Doesn't matter what you call it. I had the privilege for a long time.
Well, and that is illustrious in itself, because there are not too many people who are willing to put so much of themselves into the service of their fellow human beings. So that's always commendable and inspiring, and hopefully some people will get inspired by what you've done. Now, we'd like to talk about something that's less inspiring and more frustrating, and that's the story of our famous Highway 17.
Yeah.
This all originated because of a wonderful people's movement where people got together back in December, and it was quite a show. So perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit about what you know.
Well, the struggle for improving Highway 17 is not exactly a new one. I mean, I'm a victim of Highway 17 myself. My father was killed in a car accident on the highway, a different section of it than the one we're talking about today. But the word Highway 17 has a special something in my mind, and as a matter of fact, at the time you're going to show the interview, it'll probably be almost to the day, the anniversary of my father's death on the highway. Because it was
when was
February 12, 1954.
February 12th.
So, so the memory regarding Highway 17 will never disappear. And what bothers me at the human level is that there are going to be more victims. There are going to be more children like me who are going to lose parents on Highway 17. And until we improve the safety of that route, and to improve the safety, we have to improve the capacity. The road is so much over capacity that it's ridiculous. My colleague at Hill and Knowlton, Jeffrey Pollowin, was telling me that if you measure from the split where Highway 17 and 417 split at St. Laurent Boulevard, most of us refer to that as the split, as you know, and you go 20 kilometers on Highway 17 and 20 kilometers on 417. Highway 417, of course, is 4 lanes wide. It was built that way. That's fine. But the traffic count on Highway 17, where it's 2 lane, at the same distance from the split, is twice what it is on the other one. So that means for every piece of road, remember the other one's a 4 lane, this one's a 2 lane. That means on a per lane basis, it has 4 times the traffic. Now, how can that be? You know, and it's no wonder that people are stuck in it every day, that they can't move. It's very much over capacity. Now,
and let's not assume that people are respecting that distance requirement.
Oh,
because by the time that happens, we're
they're not.
bumper to bumper.
And here comes the safety and people's patience. Well, of course, if you're completely stuck in traffic, you're not moving very fast. Maybe at that point, it's not as bad. But when there's just a lighter but still quite intense amount of traffic, and there's a slowpoke in front of you, people will, by their very nature, occasionally take chances, and that's where the safety gets in. Anyway,
you mean take chances in passing?
Exactly, and even though many times there are places they shouldn't do so, especially along the rock cut west of Cumberland, but it still happens because that's just the way things are.
Exactly.
In any event, what is obviously needed is to widen that road. Just widening it to 4 lanes, normal 4 lanes, I think is going to be a very difficult proposition. I think even the language that we use should always refer to adding bus lanes, or HOV lanes, as they're sometimes called, high occupancy vehicle lanes on each side. Of course, it's arguably the same thing, isn't it? If you have from 7 to 9 a.m. or whatever will be decided once they're built, you know, we'll figure out what time to put the traffic. But the important thing is to pave the shoulders on each side, to add those 2 lanes, and then probably the best way, as I say, is to get them to be high occupancy vehicle lanes for the buses. Let's say 7 or 6:30 to 9:30 a.m. They're for buses only, buses and other vehicles of that nature. And then the rest of the day, well, obviously they can be used by everybody because it doesn't make any difference. And anyway, the road's going to be built at that point.
Right.
But
so as I understand it, the technology is there, the space is there. There are not too many homes that need to be expropriated.
I don't think there are any homes that need to be expropriated. What's going to be needed, the environmental assessment has been done for it. It's been challenged by a few people living just west of Cumberland. And for those of your viewers who have even less hair than me, they might remember it as the area around the former Edgewater Hotel near Cumberland. And in that area, very, very nice homes were built, and very small number of people have protested. And I'm sorry, but in my mind, if you build a home on a Trans-Canada highway, cars are going to go by. That's all there is to it. And they knew that before they did what they did. But in any event, even for them, the widening of the highway properly constructed is an improvement, because they can't turn left right now to go home at night, and if they do, their own personal safety is affected. A properly constructed highway with these additional lanes for high occupancy vehicle and turnarounds, you know, that you either go underneath and come back up the other side, or there's a slight overpass and you turn around and you come back. Anyone who's familiar with Highway 40 in Quebec, there's one of those turnarounds roughly at the Kirkland exit. It serves no other purpose than to turn around. You get off and turn around and come back the other way. Well, that's exactly the kind of thing that is needed there, except you would need like 2 or 3 of them perhaps one somewhere where those very nice homes that I described are located. Another one where, again, referring to languages of days gone by, where the La Porte Gardens used to be, somewhere around there. Another turnaround there, and perhaps another one vis-a-vis Quigley Hill Road or something like that. Maybe a roundabout at Cumberland where people could actually go in, turn around, and go back the other way and enter their own property safely. So those same people who are against it now perhaps will benefit more than anybody else.
It sounds like it.
Because how can they, if I were living there and I was driving home from Ottawa, I think I'd want to go and turn around in Cumberland and drive back, just so that nobody hits my car in the back end.
Yeah, it would.
That's got to be very dangerous now. And there are countless
I'm
accidents to prove it.
I'm sold.
Anyway, I think we've convinced ourselves that the road needs to be improved. But what we haven't done yet is convince the authorities within the city of Ottawa. There's no need to convince Mayor Desjardins. He already is convinced. He's already voted for it. He's already done his part, and he's already having the part inside Clarence Rockland improved. So how many times does he need to say yes? So he's on our side. What's needed is to get people from this area, from Clarence Rockland, to tell their friends in Cumberland, Sarsfield, Beckett's Creek, and all of those areas that they too are affected by this highway, and they need to support the people from Clarence Rockland, and at the same time support themselves, because it's good for them too. So we need to get them to rally with us vis-a-vis the mayor of Ottawa, and of course the councillor for the East, and my own councillor where I live, Stephen Blais, to convince them to put that on a higher priority. I can't for one understand when you're driving in the city of Ottawa on Trim Road, for instance, you leave Orleans and you go south. They've improved that road to 4 lanes, and part of it is a cornfield on each side. There's nobody there. Why was that last 2 kilometers done instead of improving 2 more kilometers on Highway 17? And the same thing applies to Mer Bleu Road. It was improved for future development that's not even completed yet, and really some of it is only half built. One section of it, at the intersection of near Renault Road, they've actually built the 4-lane highway, and it's closed right now. There are cones in front of it. There's even a portion of it that isn't used. Wouldn't that money have been better spent where there's these thousands and thousands of people a day stuck in traffic jams on Highway 17? I think to ask the question is to answer it.
So I take it the Hill and Knowlton weren't the ones lobbying for those 2 roads?
No. Good grief, no. I still
so who was?
I don't know who, I don't know what's behind that, and I use them sometimes. I travel from our home in Sarsfield to Orleans, and I said, why exactly is this here? You know, I'm going around a roundabout at the intersection of Brian Coburn Road and Trim Road, for instance. There's a roundabout there. There's not a single house around it. And last summer, I assure you, the cornfield was very nice, but that does not justify building road to that capacity. Not at the same time. I mean, if that's all we had to do with the money, fine, maybe. But when there's such need on what is today Highway 17 that's not being satisfied at all, and it's not even in their plans for the future, well, then there's something wrong.
There's definitely something wrong, and it's exactly what we were talking about in the earlier part of the interview, about how sometimes you wish you had a computer program making these decisions as opposed to human beings, because logic would dictate that this would happen. If you balance off the environmental problems, the safety problems, the commercial problems at this end, everything would argue for.
Well, and in the case of that road, if you just use the traffic count, just the raw data, definitely it qualifies for 4 lanes. And it qualifies for 4 lanes, and there's some left over, for sure. It qualified for 4 lanes a long time ago, in other words.
Yeah, so maybe Ottawa is just afraid of losing all the people to our beautiful corner of the world. They think
Well,
if there was a highway and easier to get
I
out.
don't know what it is.
Being
There's
facetious.
perhaps an element in there that they're building a highway which is largely used by people who don't live in the city. Well, every road leads somewhere.
Yeah.
And everybody who comes somewhere came from somewhere else. By definition, that's why you need roads.
Yeah.
When you leave Ottawa to drive to Highway 401 and you take Highway 416, you're traveling to another municipality. Well, somebody else built that piece of road and the people of Ottawa are using it.
Yeah.
Well, that's the same thing.
Yeah.
You don't build roads only because you're going to travel on them personally.
No.
If that were the case, there would be no Trans-Canada.
No
There would be a
kidding.
Trans-Ottawa and a Trans-Prescott-Russell and a Trans-something else, all probably roads that wouldn't even touch each other.
There would be no Carling Avenue because it was just a hospital at the other end, right?
And,
Out
well,
in the,
at one
in
point
the
it
field.
was, yeah. But these roads are built to accommodate people from various communities and link them to one another, not just for domestic use, if I can call it that way,
No.
not just for use of people in the community. So,
Well, not to mention that the people who use it don't travel in one direction. We've got the people from Clarence
Obviously.
Rockland traveling to Ottawa, spending money there, having jobs there.
oh, that was
So
pointed
they-
out at the meeting
Yeah.
that we had in Rockland, and an excellent meeting it was, and all this
Mm-hmm.
mobilization of people. When the people of Rockland go to Place d'Orléans, or they go to the National Arts Center, or they
Mm-hmm.
or to Place d'Orléans and then for dinner and then to the National Arts Center,
Mm-hmm.
they're spending some of their money in Ottawa, and a lot of it.
And we want them safe because otherwise their ambulances get called out.
Exactly.
Sorry, it's-
you know, it's everybody. Everybody serves to benefit, but the City of Ottawa needs to understand, first of all, that the responsibility goes beyond accommodating just themselves, and secondly, this is also good for their own residents.
Sure it is.
It's both.
And at the risk of being opportunistic here, I would even say that not building that highway is the equivalent of building a wall. And we all know how we feel about walls these days when people can't get through it.
Yeah, well, it is.
It's
does,
not cool.
It is very much a hindrance
It is.
to the development of our area, but not just to the development. It's not just a matter of attracting new growth here, which is laudable in itself, but it's a matter of the people who live here already who are inconvenienced. I mean,
Yeah.
there are people who live in Rockland who have been wishing for that road to be improved for the last quarter of a century.
Yeah, that's a
That's
long
not
time.
too much to ask. I think they've been pretty patient.
Maybe too patient. So
Yeah.
it's time to start making noise.
Well, that's what hopefully people are
Yeah.
doing in a respectful way, but at the same time to try and get everyone they know in Ottawa to join them, and for themselves too to keep on pressuring where the pressure is needed. Like I said, it's not a matter of convincing the authorities in Prescott-Russell to four-lane the portion here. They've already approved it.
No.
It's just a matter of the construction starting. So that's already done. It's the other part that's the problem inside the City of Ottawa.
So that's the message. It's let's pass the buck, not pass the buck, but
No, we get-
extend the
yeah,
call.
The message is to get others to join you so that we can
Yes.
get the other half of it built. But more than
Yeah.
half, it's roughly 3/4 of it, unfortunately, is inside the City of Ottawa, and the other 1/4 is here in Clarence
Mm-hmm.
Rockland. If it were the other way around, it would be a lot easier if 3/4 of it was in
Yes,
Prescott-Russell, because we could get 3/4 of it done without asking them.
right,
But
right.
it's not, it just doesn't happen to be that way. And finally, on that, there's an historical responsibility for that road too. That's the Trans-Canada Highway as it was meant originally. There's some of the signs are still there on it. It says Trans-Canada Highway 17. Before Highway 417 was built, this was the road linking, at the time, Halifax to Vancouver. I mean, this is an historic road. And it was a provincial highway until the provincial government of Mr. Harris downloaded it to the county level. So it wasn't our road. It never was. This is only the last very short period of time. And one of the people who predicted at the time that it would be very difficult to get improvements to the road in the future was Jean-Marc Lalonde. And he had it right on the money. He said Jean-Marc was very much against the downloading of that road to the county level, and he was in strong opposition to it as a member of the provincial parliament. And he was right. He was, maybe some people thought he was exaggerating when he was saying that this was an absolutely wrong idea and it would be very hard to get improvements in the future. If anything, he probably understated how bad it would be.
Mm-hmm. Well, had he been more forceful, they probably still wouldn't have listened. There seems to be a little bit of, how should I put it, prejudice against people who argue the cause of la francophonie for some reason, because there seems to be, I'm just making that analogy because he is a staunch defender of la francophonie. In fact, received the Order of Canada for it, and you too, you had that portfolio. Yep. Did you find that as important as the Francophone community is, when you argue for it, people tend to dismiss you a little bit?
It depends what you can't use it when it's convenient to do so. I mean, you can't use that on Highway 17. It just doesn't work.
No.
You have to use it in the broader context. But sometimes people tend to say, oh no, the reason they're not doing it is because of the Francophone presence in the area or some such. It's too easy to say. Yeah. Anyway, I don't like being a victim. I'm a little bit too proud for that. and anyway, it doesn't work.
I like that.
But, it's
true.
I'm proud of my roots, and I think they should be always used to demonstrate how we can do things the right way and how we can improve upon things, as opposed to a form of victimization that
I would agree, and I would even say that this being a Francophone community is a plus. It's not a drawback.
Of course.
And
it's
I hadn't thought
value.
about it, but maybe it should be used as an argument as to why we should be given that extra highway, because where else is there a Francophone community like this in the neighborhood?
I think it's a source of pride, certainly for the area. We haven't, overall, we haven't capitalized on it quite as much as we could. Think of it this way. How many call centers are there across Canada? There are a whole bunch of them all over the place. They answer telephones for everybody. There's none here. Wouldn't this be a perfect spot to have a huge call center?
Yeah.
You think it would be hard to get bilingual people to work there in Clarence Rockland?
No.
They're everywhere.
Yes.
Not just you and me. And there's an economic benefit to that collectively we haven't succeeded yet in merchandising it to its full potential, because we do have lots of added value. Yeah, I know that you speak 4 languages yourself, at least, if not more.
4, yeah.
And I speak 3. And
everybody should. It's not rocket science.
Well, yes, but in this community, speaking at least 2 is normal, par for the course. Can you say that about Kanata?
No.
I don't think so. Can you say it about Arnprior? I know it's not so.
No.
Can you say it about Kemptville? No, but you can say it about this area.
Yeah.
So we're diverging, of course, from the Highway 17 issue.
That's okay.
But if we're going to talk about the economy of our area, I think we have something to add here.
It only enriches. Having several cultures together, having several languages together, it's only good for human beings and communities.
Yep.
There is no doubt about it. We don't want our kids being bored. We want them to learn all these languages, and we want them to learn all the cultures and come up with their own cultures, because obviously they have something to add too. Yes.
And on top of that, they add music to it all, and maybe they can...
Yes. Speaking of music, you are a music man too now.
Yes, I'm a musician.
From busboy to kitchen to cabinet
to
musician.
My wife says jokingly that she married a musician who ended up being a politician, who upon retirement returned to being a musician. And Marianne and I play music together. She plays mandolin. She's actually a very good mandolin player. She had never touched a musical instrument in her life until 5 years ago. And she made a passing remark of how someone played the mandolin in Florida and how beautiful it was. And then she said something to me like this, I wonder if I could learn how to play it. I thought about it for a second, and I said, I have absolutely no idea. We were on our way back from Florida. The day after, I walked into Steve's music store on Rideau Street in Ottawa, and I said, I want a mandolin, and I want it right now. And I bought one, and I said, now you'll tune it up for me, but you'll show me how to tune it, and show me the first 3 chords, and I'm a musician, don't worry, I'll worry about the rest. So they did that, and brought it home and said, hi, Marianne, happy birthday.
Good for you.
She's never let it go. She carries it in her arms like it were a baby, all the time. And she has developed into quite a good musician. We've played all over the place on cruise ships and jams and this and that, music festivals. And as we're doing this interview in a few days, we're playing at what is known as the Everglades Bluegrass Festival, just southwest of Miami. And we're playing
in a few days.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you're hopping on a plane, you leave here?
Yes.
We
have a home in Florida.
Poor you.
We live there in winter. Anyway, and we're going to do that. And as we do often, just a few days ago, we were on the Danny Stewart Bluegrass Cruise, and we were playing there, and that's going to the Bahamas. And a few weeks before that, we were on another cruise going to Cozumel, Mexico. And we play music all over the place just for the fun of it, just for a hobby.
I'd say you've got this retirement thing pretty well mastered.
Yeah.
You're learning Spanish, you're playing
except for
music.
the staying quiet part, yes.
Yeah, well, maybe that's not all it's cracked up to be.
No, I don't know. I haven't tried it.
So you do realize that with all of this musical development and probably language development, you're likely to add a few years to your life. You may be around for another 30 or 40 years.
Okay.
You're okay with that,
Okay,
all right.
I'm okay with that, and you can add a few more to that too, and I'll still be okay.
Okay.
But yes, I'm told that music and languages are both very good for intellectual stimulation.
Yes.
And that, for instance, the onset of dementia and things like diseases of that kind is considerably lower for people who speak more languages than for people who are unilingual. So if it's true, and if music also helps in that regard, well, maybe it'll keep us active for a while.
So what do you think about this? Back in the 60s, when Pierre Trudeau brought in the bilingualism policy because he wanted to make sure that the Official Languages Act, to make sure that
Actually,
everybody...
it was Pearson.
It was Pearson?
The
Okay,
Official Languages
thank you
Act,
for
yeah.
correcting me on that. So many people attributed it to Trudeau. Okay, Pearson.
Yep.
So he
Quite
brought
true.
that in because he wanted the country not to lose its francophone nature, which is excellent. What if, in order to make sure that we don't lose our healthcare system, we make everybody learn another language? Wouldn't that be a great scheme?
Well, maybe if you, for those people who...
Everyone can do it.
Well, I think so. And,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I also think that most people could learn how to play a musical instrument too. But
I'll have to take you up on that. But
so people say, they watch us play and they tell us, I wish I had learned to play a musical instrument. And my answer is always, well, what's stopping you now?
Yeah, arthritis.
If you're, no, but if you're assuming that you're in reasonably good health, and let's say you're retired or semi-retired or have otherwise time on your hand, why can't you pick up a musical instrument? And it's the same with languages, by the way.
Yes.
I've attended the UNAM, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, the Mexican National Autonomous University in Gatineau, and I was surprised to see the number of people there learning an additional language who had gray hair. It was the majority of them.
Yeah.
And everybody says, I wish I had learned how to speak another language when I was a toddler or something.
Yeah.
That's not so.
No.
Maybe it would have been easier. It's easier when you're younger. I don't think there's any doubt about that the young brain assimilates information like a sponge.
Sure it does.
That's true. However, the younger people are usually busier. If you're retired, you tend to be less busy. Maybe you'll learn it slower, but you usually have more time to do it, and you can still. So that applies to languages. I think it applies to music. Certainly applied to Marianne. she was well retired when she learned how to play a musical instrument.
And then for all of the retirees, so to speak, to use the term loosely, because none of you are really retired from life, you go down south, you go to South America, you go to Mexico, and at least you can interact more with the natives, speak
absolutely.
the language, and or if you want to go to China, learn Chinese, well, that might be a little more complicated. That might challenge that theory about being able to learn a language.
Yeah, well, I'm sure learning Mandarin, there's no Chinese language per se, but learning, for instance, Mandarin, which is one of the Chinese languages, well, there is a Chinese language, but it's a written language. Orally, they're all different. But learning that, it's from a different family of languages. It's not Indo-European, doesn't have subject, verb, complement, and so on the way most European languages do. Although I do know that you speak one European language which is more complicated and more distant from the rest of them.
I was lucky to learn it before I knew what I was doing.
Yeah, so that is very laudable. But for instance, learning French and English, when you think of it, the two languages are not that far apart.
No, they're not.
They're not. Very many words in English are borrowed from the French, and in modern terms, many French words are borrowed from the English too, especially computer language and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, and from French to Spanish, that's not very far, and French to Italian is even closer.
Yes.
And Spanish to French, then there's Catalan, which is a language in between.
Yes.
I can read Catalan, I can't speak it.
Yes.
But it's all, for me, it's always the fun of learning something.
The challenge of something new, absolutely. And of course, with the music, there are so many different kinds of music. And let's not forget, and too bad we're running out of time, but I would love to have heard your views, and maybe before you hop on that plane, I can steal a few moments of your time, about learning about different religions. In the world today, there's so much talk about this religion, that religion, and yet to find the commonalities and to make it all so much easier for people would be...
That would be a very good
ideal
subject for another interview, or even at any time for that matter. I did study a little bit the history of religion, but mostly the history of the Jewish religion in my case, and I also did work on the history of the Mennonites. Which is, as you know, a Christian sect, more based in Holland, but originally in Switzerland. And again, there are very few differences between us, and there are not even that much difference between Muslims and Christians if you were to look at it closely. And to use. In that context, we're all the sons of Abraham.
We daughters.
Yeah.
Daughters.
Daughter, okay.
Well, you know what, Don? We have to close now because we're coming to the end of our hour, but I think we've come full circle from the beginning of the interview, because we started talking about how somebody like you sets out on a path to help people and to make the world a better place and a community a better, stronger place for people to live well and safely and s'épanouir. I don't know an equivalent word in English for that, but s'épanouir involves so much. And that is what all of the religions are about, not about the customs, the routines that you have to follow in church, but really the feeling of giving and community and helping.
Yeah, well, the other is just an expression of how to do that.
Yes, if you can't think of a better way. You've done it. You've done it. And we thank you. We thank you for your service, and we look forward to many more years of it.